Hey guys, so today I'm going to be talking about pre-event nutrition. The pre-competition meal as well as fluids are really important for the athlete's energy stores as well as for their performance during the event. Eating too much fat, fiber, or just food in general can actually impair the performance by causing GI distress. Ideally, you're going to want to consume a full meal about 3 to 5 hours before the event, composed of mostly carbohydrates, moderate protein, and lower in fat and fiber, as well as ensuring you're getting enough fluids. So I actually got the chance to interview the Olympic dietitian. She works primarily with biathlon and bobsled skeleton luge athletes. However, she does work with a wide range of athletes on the Olympic team. So let's see what she has to say about pre-event nutrition.
When you're determining a meal for an athlete pre-event, how do you go about determining the macronutrient distribution? You can just give an overview. You don't have to get too specific, but
So the most important macronutrients that we think about for athletes before they go into any type of training or competition would be hydration. So we want to make sure that we get enough fluids and water in. And then carbohydrates are the other main approach. So we can include some fats and proteins, but the number one source of energy that our bodies are using during activity are carbohydrates. So that's usually the main focus. And depending how close you are to that training session or that competition is when we'd want to maybe think about including more fats and proteins. We've got longer lasting energy. Or even just the type of carbohydrate. So a simple carbohydrate I want to eat if I was maybe having a snack close to that start time versus more complex carbohydrates, so like whole wheat bread. If I'm starting out a little bit later, so having a full meal, maybe a couple hours out before that competition.
how long before a competition would you recommend a full meal for an athlete?
So typically if athletes are going to eat a full meal, I'd say anywhere from 2 to 4 hours beforehand, and a lot of that is just based on the individual. So how much food they feel comfortable eating before they go into that competition or race, as well as just the type of food. So if we know an athlete maybe gets a little bit more nervous and they can't eat as much, I'd want them to eat less food, more carbohydrate based, closer to that race. So maybe like 30 to 60 minutes before they would go out to competition. And then if I have an athlete who I know they can eat a full meal, that would be closer to maybe like 3 to 4 hours out before that competition, so that they can have more of those complex carbohydrates plus fats and proteins as well, to make sure that that energy lasts through that full 4 hours before they go out to compete.
Okay, so how does the pre-event meal change for an aerobic sport or an anaerobic sport?
So for our aerobic sports, maybe like one of the teams that I work with is biathlon. They have a lot more endurance that they have to go through their events versus some of the bobsled, skeleton, and luge athletes. So especially for them, that's where carbohydrates and fluids are really important, because they will compete for a long enough time where they actually go through all of the stores that they have of carbohydrate in their muscles. So we want to make sure that even up to like 1 to 2 days before, or the dinner before they go into that race day, that they're getting extra carbohydrates and fluids, so we top off all of their stores. For our anaerobic athletes, they're more of the strength power athletes, so they're using carbohydrates for fuel, but not quite as much. So they can get away with doing more of a regular meal that's maybe 30 to 35% of their plate being more of that protein and carbohydrates coming from fruits and veggies, and then carbohydrates from starches for the rest of that.
Do you support the use of any pre-event supplements, such as caffeine or anything like that?
Yeah, and so we, especially at the Olympic level, there are a little bit more open fields than collegiate as far as what supplements we can use for athletes. And the important thing that I work with athletes on is just understanding what supplements are actually safe first, and then which supplements are also actually effective. So we do know that caffeine is effective, and there's really good research to prove that individual to individual that could have a benefit. So we typically will practice caffeine intentionally. That's one of our goals now, not just having a cup of coffee and enjoying it for that, but using the timing and the amount correctly. We have a lot of athletes who use pre-workout supplements that will have items like beta-alanine or creatine in them as well. And as long as they're from a safe and trusted source, we just encourage athletes to come meet with me or come meet with sports med, and we'll talk through how those products are affecting their training or affecting their competition, and always encourage athletes to make sure that they're trialing it for multiple weeks or multiple events similar to that race day or that competition day before they kind of get to the big day, because we don't want to try something new on race day and not know how we're going to be affected by it.
So you already kind of touched on fluids, but do you have a general recommendation to your athletes, or do you do a more individualized suggestions?
Most of the fluid needs are pretty individualized, and I'd say for our athletes, we don't always get necessarily as specific of giving them like an ounces per day that they're supposed to replace. A lot of what I work with athletes on is just figuring out how much fluids they're losing when they're training or competing. And so we can do that through weighing in before a training session and weighing in after. And so most of them we've kind of talked through, we've done that for a number of measures, we've talked through what their sweat rate is. So they kind of know typically how much fluid they're losing during that session. And then we always want to replace that by about 1.5 times. And for a lot of our winter sport athletes, they don't really think that they're sweating that much or they're losing that much fluid. And it's harder to determine if you really feel like you're losing a lot of water. But it does make a huge impact for focus, and especially for all of our sliding sport athletes. We want to make sure that they have all of the mental focus they can to go down the track at 50 to 70 miles or 90 miles per hour, I guess. So for a lot of them, we just kind of work on knowing, typically if I'm training for 2 hours, I'm losing about 2 pounds, so I need to have about 1.5 times that amount over the next 24 hours before I'd go to race again.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.